So you're thinking about a mobile home park, the most quietly dismissed asset class in American real estate, the one everyone pictures as a muddy lot with a broken-down truck on blocks. A perfectly embarrassing retirement, I suppose, except that the per-acre cash flow of a well-run park rivals assets 20 times its prestige, and the cap rates on this asset class have been the most stable in commercial real estate for the better part of 30 years. The unusual thing about the business is the one piece of it almost nobody mentions in the first conversation. You own the land, you own the streets, you own the water lines and the sewer lines, or the leach field. You own the small office at the front of the park, and the gravel access road, and the curb signs. You do not own the homes themselves. Your tenants own those, which means you have built a business on the one thing no landlord is supposed to have: residents who cannot afford to leave. The rent that arrives every month carries, on any close inspection, a quieter accounting than the brochure runs. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly why that is the asset class's load-bearing mechanic, why it has produced the most stable cash flow in commercial real estate, and why a single specific feature of the modern manufactured home decides whether your residents are functionally permanent or seasonally itinerant. Let us start with the rent. A typical American mobile home park charges between $300 and $750 a month in lot rent. The lot rent covers the use of the pad, the use of the streets, the supply of water and sewer to the lot edge, the supply of trash service, and the general administrative overhead of the park. It does not cover the home. The home is owned by the resident, financed by the resident, insured by the resident, maintained by the resident, and is the resident's responsibility in every operational sense. This sounds, on paper, like the rent is low. Compared to multifamily rent in any equivalent metro, it is. A small city 90-pad park in a regional market where the equivalent apartment rents for $1,400 a month is collecting roughly $550 a month per pad. The resident in that market is paying $1,000 less per month to occupy a piece of land for which they own the structure on top of it. The resident is, in nominal terms, a winner. The asset class's load-bearing mechanic is in the rent comparison the resident is implicitly running. The resident is not comparing the lot rent against the equivalent apartment. The resident is comparing the lot rent plus the resident's own mortgage payment on the home against the equivalent apartment. The resident's mortgage payment on a manufactured home, financed at the higher manufactured home loan rate, runs between $300 and $750 a month at typical balance levels. The total monthly housing cost for the resident is therefore between $600 and $1,450, which is broadly equivalent to the apartment. The resident pays the same nominal cost. What the resident gets in exchange is ownership of the home, which is the only form of home ownership available to them at the income tier they occupy. The asset class is, in plain demographic terms, the entry point of American home ownership for households earning between $35,000 and $75,000 a year in regions where the median single-family home price is at $400,000 or above. The resident is not buying lot rent. The resident is buying access to home ownership at the lowest possible entry price. Now to the part the brochure does not mention. Once the resident has installed the home on the pad, the cost of relocating the home to a different pad is between $4,000 and $12,000, depending on the home's age, the home's size, the distance to the new pad, and the regulatory permitting required at the destination jurisdiction. A 1990s vintage single-wide can sometimes be relocated. A 2010s vintage double-wide can theoretically be relocated, but rarely is, because the structural integrity of a modern manufactured home does not, in practice, survive a second installation. The home becomes, in the cost of relocation sense, an immovable improvement on the pad. The resident's home is structurally tied to the operator's lot. This is the mechanic the asset class is built on. The resident, having installed a home on a pad, cannot economically move the home. The resident, having paid $5,000 to $30,000 in down payment toward the home, cannot economically abandon the home. The resident's choice, when the operator raises lot rent, is to pay the raised rent or to forfeit the home's equity, the home itself, the resident's housing arrangement, and the resident's down payment. In economic terms, The resident's switching cost is roughly between $15,000 and $40,000, depending on the home value at the time of the rent increase. This is what the named consolidator means when he uses the phrase, "the most defensible cash flow in commercial real estate." The cash flow is defensible because the rent-paying tenant cannot, without incurring catastrophic personal cost, decline to pay the rent. The named consolidator currently running this play at scale, who is publicly named in every regional industry conference, started buying parks in the mid-1990s, has built a portfolio that, as of public reporting numbers, in the high hundreds of parks, and is open about the model in published industry interviews. He has been quoted multiple times as describing the asset class's pricing power as a direct function of the resident's relocation cost. He is not hiding the mechanic. The mechanic is, in his framing, the mechanic. Beyond him, the larger consolidators are publicly traded manufactured housing community REITs that have, over the past decade, acquired thousands of parks across the Sunbelt and southwestern markets. They operate under the same fundamental model and have, at the institutional level, established cap rate benchmarks in the 4 to 6% range. The retiring buyer who acquires a mom-and-pop park at an 8 to 10% cap rate is buying at a substantial spread to where the institutional capital is pricing the same asset class, which is the source of the buyer arbitrage in this segment. What does a mom-and-pop park actually cost to run? Operating expenses at a 90-pad small city park run between 30 and 38% of revenue at a well-managed property. The breakdown is roughly 15% property tax and insurance, 6 to 8% water sewer trash supplied at the park level, 4 to 6% maintenance and reserves, 4 to 6% on-site or off-site management, and 2 to 4% miscellaneous including legal, accounting, and occasional eviction processing. The net operating income on a $550 average lot rent at 90 pads with 95% occupancy is approximately $380,000 a year. On a $2.1 million acquisition, that is a roughly 18% cap rate. The mom-and-pop seller, when he priced the park at $2.1 million, was using a per-unit comparable sales valuation rather than a cap rate valuation. He valued the park at $23,000 per pad. The institutional acquirer would value the same park at a 5% cap rate, which on $380,000 of net operating income would be $7.6 million. The arbitrage between the mom-and-pop seller's price and the institutional acquirer's price on this single small city park is roughly $5.5 million on paper. About $1.5 million of that is consumed by transaction costs, financing friction, and the operational repositioning required to drag a mom-and-pop park up to institutional standard. The retiring buyer who acquires the asset at $2.1 million and operates it at $380,000 of net operating income with no rent-raising activism has captured the remaining $4 million of arbitrage simply by paying mom-and-pop prices and operating to the standard model. This is the part of the asset class that is, in practical terms, the cleanest financial engineering opportunity available to retirement-age buyers in commercial real estate. The mispricing is structural. The mispricing has persisted for 30 years. The institutional capital has compressed cap rates in the largest portfolio acquisitions, but has not yet compressed cap rates in the under $5 million segment, which is where most retiring buyers operate. The water and sewer infrastructure of a park is the operational variable that decides whether the park can be remotely managed or requires hands-on operation. A park on municipal water and municipal sewer, where the resident pays the municipality directly for usage, requires almost no on-site labor beyond pad rent collection and basic grounds maintenance. A part-time manager at 15 to 20 hours a week can run a 90-pad park of this configuration. A park on a private well and a private septic field, by contrast, requires on-site labor for well pump maintenance, septic system pumping, leach field monitoring, and the occasional $20,000 capital event when something breaks. The labor stack on the latter park is 20 to 30 hours a week, and the operating margin compresses accordingly. The brochure, naturally, prefers the parks on the municipal grid. The lot rent stabilization regulatory risk is the third operational variable. A growing number of jurisdictions in California, Oregon, Washington, parts of Florida, parts of Massachusetts, and increasing portions of Colorado have passed lot rent stabilization ordinances that cap annual rent increases at 3 to 7%, require 90-day notice, prohibit retaliatory eviction, and in some cases require operator-funded relocation assistance if the park closes. A retiring buyer who acquires a park in a jurisdiction that subsequently passes lot rent stabilization in year 3 of the hold has lost the rent-raising lever that the institutional pricing assumes. The asset's cap rate, as it sits on the buyer's balance sheet, compresses meaningfully toward the regulated baseline. The named retirement that lost the deal at the lot rent regulatory event has happened repeatedly in California and Oregon, where the buyer acquired the park in 2018 expecting steady 3 to 5% annual rent increases, and instead held the park through the passage of statewide ordinances capping increases at a fraction of the assumed trajectory. 3 reference cases. The $700,000 rural park with 20 pads at a $350 average lot rent and 90% occupancy generates $75,000 in net operating income against the acquisition. An 11% cap rate, marginal asset, better described as a small business than an investment. The buyer at this tier is roughly always operating the park personally and is, in effect, hiring himself. The $2.1 million small city park with 90 pads at a $550 average lot rent and 95% occupancy generates $380,000 in net operating income, an 18% cap rate against the acquisition price. The institutional pricing on the same asset would be in the $7.5 million range. The arbitrage is real. The buyer at this tier can operate the park through an off-site management arrangement, and the cash flow can support a retirement. The $7.4 million Sunbelt Park with 240 pads at a $650 average lot rent and 95% occupancy generates roughly $950,000 in net operating income, a 13% cap rate against the acquisition. The institutional pricing on the same asset is $12 to $15 million. The arbitrage is meaningful, and the asset can be genuinely passively managed at this scale. The entry capital requirement, however, excludes most retiring buyers from this segment. There is the matter the brochure does not feature on the cover. The cash flow depends, in plain terms, on the resident's inability to relocate. The mechanism is structural. The mechanism produces stable rent. The mechanism is also the mechanism that allows the operator, in the absence of regulatory friction, to raise rent on a population that is, by definition, demographically tied to the bottom quartile of American income. The 2 operational scenarios most retiring buyers actually encounter are roughly the following. The first scenario is the acquisition of a park where the prior owner has not raised lot rent in 8 to 12 years. The lot rent is, at acquisition, 60 to 70% of the local market rate for equivalent lots. The buyer raises rent over a 3-year normalization schedule to bring lots to current market rate. Annual rent increases of 15 to 25% are typical at this scenario, are widely accepted by residents who recognize they have been below market for a long time, and produce a net operating income improvement of 40 to 70% on a stabilized basis. The cap rate expands accordingly. The buyer captures the upside arbitrage cleanly. The second scenario is the acquisition of a park where the prior owner has raised lot rent every year at the local jurisdictional cap. The lot rent is, at acquisition, at or near the market rate. The buyer has no headline rent-raising lever. The buyer's path to improved cash flow runs through operational efficiency, water-sewer cost recovery from residents via individual metering, occupancy improvement through new resident acquisition, and the gradual replacement of older homes with newer homes at the upper end of the park's rent tier mix. The improvement curve is slower and the arbitrage is smaller, but the regulatory exposure is significantly lower. A buyer with a defensive temperament and a long hold period preference should anchor the acquisition strategy on this scenario. The single largest mistake retirement age buyers make in this asset class is the assumption that they are acquiring scenario 1 when they are actually acquiring scenario 2. The seller's representation of the rent history, the seller's broker's pitch deck, and the actual rent roll history sometimes diverge by an amount that decides the next 10 years of the buyer's return. The forensic accounting on the rent roll, including the inspection of every individual lot's billing history for the trailing 36 months, is the single most important pre-acquisition exercise in this asset class. The accountant time is roughly $4,000 to $6,000. Almost no retirement age buyer commissions it. The depreciation schedule on the underlying park infrastructure is the third operating variable retiring buyers consistently underestimate. The streets, the water mains, the sewer lines, the electrical infrastructure, the lighting, the perimeter fencing, and the office building are all depreciating physical assets with maintenance and replacement schedules. A 1970s vintage park where none of this has been substantially renewed in the past 3 decades is carrying deferred capital expenditure of roughly $4,000 to $8,000 per pad. On a 90-pad park, that is between $360,000 and $720,000 in maintenance, the new buyer will absorb, either during the hold period or at sale. Whether the retiring buyer chooses to operate this asset class as a financial engineer, extracting the structural arbitrage, or as a stewarding operator who keeps rent increases at general inflation rates and accepts the lower headline return in exchange for a less morally exposed cash flow, is the buyer's question. The asset class will tolerate either approach. The cap rate will be different. The cash flow will be different. The morning shave conversation the buyer has with himself will be different. This channel is not, in this video or any other, going to instruct you which of those two operators to be. It will, however, point out that the choice exists, that almost no other commercial asset class makes the moral dimension this legible at acquisition time, and that the brochure photograph of the park entry sign is hiding none of this. The residents who cannot afford to leave are visible from the entry sign. The buyer who acquires the park has acquired the residence along with the dirt. An expensive retirement, the cheapest one this channel has yet surveyed, and the one whose cost, naturally, is paid in a currency other than money.